Phone. I am Carlos Ramirez joining you tonight on a beautiful Friday night here in the Bay. And now we're joined by the great Larry Krueger on X or Twitter. It's at Sports Larry K. And follow him on YouTube as well, The Krug Show. That's Krueg. It's blowing up on the tube. He joins us now right here on Sports Phone. Larry, how's it going? Good night.
Yeah, long time no see.
Yeah,
huh? We just saw ran into each other down in Ninerland 2 hours ago.
Yeah, a couple hours ago we were just shaking hands, chopping it up there in Santa Clara. So let's go back before we jump into the game on Sunday. What John Lynch just said this morning with Murph and Marcus. To me, the big quote there was, "I wish I knew. I wish I knew what's taken so long." To me, that says that he thinks he has done everything in his power to either re-sign Aiyuk or trade him to the Steelers. And that means, again, I might be wrong, but that's what I'm reading here, that it's all in Brandon Aiyuk's camp's hands. How do you see this? How do you interpret that "I wish I knew" quote from John Lynch?
Well, it's really hard to know all the ins and outs of a negotiation if you're not really privy to the details, right? But I think it's safe to say that the 49ers probably could have gotten this deal done, been more proactive, and gotten this deal done for a price that's probably going to be well south of what they're going to ultimately pay if they had been more aggressive with their initial offers. That's my sense of it. But I don't know, specifically, Carlos, and I'll say this. From February on, from the NFL Draft Combine in February, Ian Rappaport from the NFL Network reported that Brandon Aiyuk and his representatives were hell-bent on letting the entire wide receiver market kind of reveal itself before they signed. So it takes two to tango. So, I know there's a lot of people want to beat up John Lynch. He didn't get it done and this and that, and he should have and this and that. But it takes two to tango. And if they were that set on waiting till Justin Jefferson reset the market and others reset it, and they weren't going to, sign, you can't force a guy to sign. Yep. So that's if you say, why is it taking this long? I think the market reset itself twice at the top. This off season, and that impacted the numbers and probably impacted the ask from Aiyuk's agent.
It's interesting because on the text line, on the 415, there's a text that says, Aiyuk wants it both ways. Get the max money, but still be on a winner. To be a winner, he needs to understand that wide receiver is not the position that makes the most in this offense. And then says, I appreciate that he is a great player, but he's a team player. Time to understand what Kyle's offense needs in the macro. He will use the talent available. And I've been saying this for months now. I said it with John Lund in July. I think Brandon Aiyuk needs to understand that he is an Avenger, and I used the Avenger analogy a month ago. And I said, if we see the 49ers, Larry, as the Avengers, I think Brock Purdy would be Captain America. I think Trent Williams would be the Hulk. I think Christian McCaffrey would be Iron Man. And you could go down the list. And maybe when you get to, Hawkeye or Falcon or something, that's Brandon Aiyuk. And I'm not saying he's bad. If you put Brandon Aiyuk in the Patriots, he is Captain America. He is Iron Man in that offense. But in this scheme, he is not the go-to guy. And that's my opinion. What say you?
I don't know if you can say he's not the go-to guy when he led them in receptions. He touched the ball. If he's not the go-to guy, at least in the passing game, who is? To me, he is the modern day receiver that you're looking for. In a lot of ways, he's the perfect wide receiver for the Shanahan offense. Why? Because he blocks. He blocks willingly downfield and with a vengeance, and he takes pride in it. And the 49ers run the ball the most of any team in pro football. So you got to have a receiver who blocks, and he really does block. So I don't think he's a me guy. I think this is the first example, really. He's not a guy that holds the court at his locker. You're in there.
Yep.
Yep. He's not a me guy. He when he doesn't get the ball, he doesn't complain. And there's several factors, including, their the other weapons they have and how often they run the ball and the pace that they play, all these things have really suppressed his statistics. So I just think that it's disingenuous. I like, I like Lynch and Shanahan, but if I have to side with one side or the other here, I'm siding with Brandon because I really do believe he's earned the money. And if his numbers are a little bit shy of some other guys, okay, but then he could come back and argue that his efficiency beats theirs.
Right.
And efficiency seems to rule the day in a lot of these analytics across pro sports. So I think the Niners ought to bend a little bit and sign Aiyuk. And if that means that a year from now they can't sign Aaron Banks or they can't sign Mooney Ward or, that's, so be it. That's a tough decision. I think I would side with paying Aiyuk.
That's Larry Krueger joining us here on Sports Phone. You can catch him on YouTube at The Krug Show every single day. You cannot miss it. Now, what I mean by he's not the go-to guy is if you do a ranking of importance within the structure of the Shanahan offense, I think we could go down to maybe 7th until I name Brandon Aiyuk. Like I would go Purdy because he's a quarterback. I think Aiyuk is a better wide receiver than Purdy is a quarterback. But in the scheme, I think Purdy is more important than Aiyuk because he is the quarterback. So I think I would go Purdy, Trent, McCaffrey, Kittle, Debo tied with Aiyuk, and that's just the offense. I think if we go whole roster, I think Bosa and Mooney and even Fred Warner are above what Aiyuk represents in terms of depth, importance with the full roster than Aiyuk. I'm not saying he's a bad player, Larry. I'm saying within the construct of these Avengers Santa Clara, if you put him in the Steelers or even in the Chiefs, his importance would go up because of roster construction.
Well, it is interesting, too, because it's like, I've heard some Steeler people this week say, well, George Pickens would be our number one receiver. Your number one receiver is whoever's your best receiver.
Right.
And I'm not convinced that George Pickens is better than Brandon Aiyuk at all. I mean, I think that's probably pretty debatable. Yeah, no, but if you put Brandon Aiyuk on the Patriots, he would be their number one guy, and he'd have bigger numbers than he has right now. So, I mean, ultimately – it's like, what do you want? Do you want the biggest bag from a team that has no chance to win a Super Bowl and really no chance of going to the playoffs, probably for the rest of his career if he went there, New England? Or do you want to go to Cleveland, a team that has no winning tradition, only slightly better chance of going to the playoffs?
And the weather, Larry, and the horrible weather.
Well, the weather, and not to mention they already have a bunch of other receivers. It's not like they're a receiver away from being on top of the football world.
Right.
So, and then you're in Cleveland, and your quarterback's Deshaun Watson, and there's a lot of questions that surround Deshaun Watson. So I would say you're taking a step down quarterback-wise, even though some people think Watson's better than Purdy. But I mean, overall, or you can play for the Niners and maybe get a big bag, but not the biggest bag. And pretty much almost every year you're going to be in the NFC Championship game, and you got a great chance of winning a championship. So it's interesting. In the Pivot podcast, Carlos, he told Ryan Clark that he wanted the biggest bag, and that if it came down to a big bag and winning versus the biggest bag, he wants the biggest bag. But I think that's just something that you say when you're really pursuing the biggest bag. Once you actually get offered big numbers, then it's like, well, wait a second. Do I want to go there? New England's offered me 32. Do I want to play there? Oh, I don't want to play there. So I do think that Matt Mayoko probably said it best when he put it out there the other day that maybe Brandon requested a trade without really thinking through all the different tentacles of the possibilities of what could be coming his way.
That's Larry Krueger joining us here on the show. He's going to be our 49ers extraordinaire here on KNBR this season, joining back the KNBR family this year. We're happy. We're elated that he's back with us right in time for 49er football. Now, let's dive into the Sunday matchup, Larry, against the Saints. We were there. Yep. We heard what Shanahan said about the game. No joint practice. So how do you think that affects the overall arching theme of the game on Sunday and what Shanahan wants and needs to see from his team against the Saints this Sunday at Levi's?
Well, I think, it's a good question. I think that if they had the 2 days of joint practices, they would have gotten some of those first team reps probably out of the way. And I think you would have seen the starters for one series only. Now that you take away those 2 days of practice reps, I think, it's more likely that we're going to see the starters for 2 or 3 series.
Right.
And we may see the starters into the second quarter. You got to remember, this is now, the new NFL preseason, where there used to be 4 games and they played hard in the third game. And this is now the second of 3. And I think in some ways the second of 3 has replaced the third of 4. So this is kind of the game that most teams, play a little bit, they play their starters a little bit, and then they'll tank that final game with guys who aren't going to be on the roster.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point because, I mean, we haven't seen this before. I mean, it's uncharted territory for the 49ers and for the Saints, for that matter, to not have the joint practices and now to go with this, Larry. Do you, before we continue on the 49ers focus, do you envision a future, maybe, or how distant, let me rephrase, how distant, because I think it's coming, how distant do you think the future will be or will come with no preseason games at all?
Well, I think that's definitely where we're going. I mean, you see it in the college game, right? I mean,
Right.
They start, every game matters. And there is no, there are no games that don't matter. Exhibition football is really not worth, it's not worth the money, I mean, and everybody knows it. Football without intensity is not really football. And why would you stick it to your fans and force them to? Hey, Carlos, how about this? If you go back in time, and I didn't realize this until like recently, because it's a little bit before my time, but if you go back to the mid-'70s, there was a time where the NFL had 14 regular season games and 6 preseason games.
Yeah, that's insane. That's insane.
I mean, I think eventually we're going to get to the point where we have 20 regular season games, no preseason games, and two series of joint practices. And you heard Shanahan say it. He feels the way that a lot of coaches feel, that you can get more done in a controlled atmosphere at a joint practice than you can in the meat and potatoes of a preseason game, because it's all dictated by game situations. You control those in a practice situation. You don't in a game. So you're kind of rolling the dice that you can get the looks that you want to get, where joint practices, you can, like these, I'm sure the Niners and the Saints would have practiced that kickoff, the new kickoff, a bunch of times. And I think it would have been advantageous. And now they both kind of lose out on seeing the way another team kind of approaches that new rule.
Yeah. Larry Krueger joining us on the show. Check him out on YouTube at The Krug Show every single day on the tube. One final question for you, Larry. This Sunday, what are you looking for? What are you looking at? Where's your focus going to be at, both from a team perspective and from a player perspective for the 49ers?
Okay, a couple areas. One, I mean, you're obviously hoping for good health, right? That's what this thing's all about. Get through it unscathed physically as much as possible. They lost Ambry Thomas in the first game, and they lost Kalia Davis the next day. So that, if you can get through the game without losing people, that is goal number 1, 2, and 3. In this particular game, the 49ers are, because of the injury, Carlos, to Drake Jackson, are pretty thin at defensive end. So they've got, Bosa and Floyd, but Floyd really needs to be spotted. They signed Yatir Gross-Matos. They have Robert Beal, who's a really talented young player, but they're still a little thin at defensive end. Here come the Saints, who roll in, and they're really, really deep at defensive end. And they have a couple guys in Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey, who went to De La Salle here locally, and then, of course, Notre Dame. These are good defensive ends that may not make the Saints roster. So I think the Niners, kind of the game within the game, the story within the game, is the Niners personnel people are probably going to be looking at the Saints defensive end crop across the board and seeing if there's a guy that's not going to make the Saints that potentially could make the Niners. So that's one thing to look for. And then, to me, Jacob Cowing, and if we get to see, Jacob Cowing has had a very weird camp, Carlos, in that he went out there the first day. He was incredible. He's making all these catches. Then he pulled his hamstring. Then he was out for 4 or 5 days. Then he wasn't very good when he came back for a couple of days, and he was kind of limping through it. The last 2 days, he has just been phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a player. And I asked Shanahan about him today after practice, and he's like, yeah, he had a good practice. I got to go watch the film. But Cowing could be their vertical threat. He separates vertically. He could be their deep guy. If he makes this roster, he could give them what they wanted in Danny Gray and what they've been looking for since they had Ted Ginn back in the Harbaugh era.
That's a great call. Yep.
Look for the return guy, and then Cody Schrader. You know, if there's one guy to really watch for with this new kickoff rule, I asked Juice about this after practice the other day. Cody Schrader, the rookie undrafted free agent running back from Missouri, in some ways is almost made for this new kickoff rule. I think you're going to see him field more than a few kickoffs in this game, and this might be his ticket to the roster. So that's something to look for as well.
Well, that's a great breakdown. Larry, thank you for joining us today. We had a great chat at Levi's this morning. Looking forward to having more of those in the season here on the radio, in person at Levi's, and have a great season. Happy to have you back here at the Sports Leader. Thank you, Larry.
Thanks, Carlos. Have a great night, man.
That's